says we are streaming. Yes. That's what we want to do. Is stream.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Hey everybody. You are listening and watching to The Baptist
And the Buddhist.
with Mark.
And Brian.
And this is season 2, episode 9 of The Baptist and the Buddhist.
Go figure.
Yeah, no kidding. How many episodes was season 1?
I can't
It was like
remember.
15 or 12 or something like that. I don't know. I can't remember either. And I don't honestly, we don't even know how long season 2 is going to run, so
This might be the last season that will run for like 3 years.
this might be the last episode. No, I'm kidding. It's probably not.
No.
Well, yeah. Speaking of our podcast, which you are listening to / viewing, you can also contact the podcast as well at baptistandbuddhist@gmail.com. And you can find us everywhere on the internet. We have a presence.
We are on YouTube.
YouTube, that's one of our biggest platforms. We stream live directly to YouTube. Like you're basically a screen away from meeting us in person. It's kind of creepy, actually.
There's just one electronic, veil.
Yeah, it really is, and it's kind of sometimes it makes me wonder. No, we're also on Facebook and Instagram, and the we're on Twitter, we're on Reddit, we're on TikTok.
You're on the TikToks
But don't
with all the cool kids.
think we're active all the time.
Don't think we're active at all.
Yeah, not really. I mean, we're active in our lives outside of the podcast, but we do want to make sure your lives are enriched with podcast content, which you can binge or just keep up. Oh, it's like, oh yeah, here's my bi-weekly update from the Baptist and the Buddhist. What are they going to
Yeah,
rant about today?
we know you're probably starved of podcast material.
Yes.
There's
So
not enough out there. So we're just
today
trying
we
to
want to
lend a
break
hand.
your fast of podcasts and talk about fasting.
This episode is the fast and the curious. Curious about fasting.
Yes. We didn't even practice that, guys. So last week we talked about food, which we all eat, I'm presuming. And today we're going to talk about not food, which we all don't eat. I'm presuming. No. I'm getting myself in a weird
All of us
knot that I can't
eat.
untie.
All of us don't eat at some point.
Yeah, exactly. The most important meal of the day literally breaks a fast from dinner time or midnight snack or late night partying, and then in the morning it's that fast. That's because you haven't eaten I haven't eaten all night. It's true because you're asleep most of the time.
Unless you sleepwalk into the kitchen and eat.
Yeah, I think I knew someone that sleep ate, and it was kind of scary. Man. So fasting. What is fasting? What is fasting? That's a good question.
I mean, fasting from at least like a religious standpoint is a time of refraining from eating for a purpose. Whether that purpose be symbolic, whether it be a practical application to a spiritual path. There are a wide variety of reasons to fast from a spiritual perspective, but I think we could probably agree that like spiritual fasting is not a diet. It's not for health reasons,
right? Which there are health reason fasts sometimes.
Yes.
If you want to like cleanse yourself or whatever.
Yeah, people do intermittent fasting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those are all valid reasons. Those are not things we are going to talk about necessarily in this episode because we are talking about fasting from a Baptist and a Buddhist perspective.
You're assuming. No, I'm kidding. You're pretty much right. Yeah, from a Baptist perspective, like fasting is evil. No, I'm kidding. There's always a joke that Baptists are just fat and like we just like eating all the time. Um,
I honestly, before you even start, I have no idea what you're going to say about fasting. I can't even think of, like, short of like biblical references to fasting, how does fasting come into play in a Baptist lifestyle, I
well,
guess?
normally in Baptist circles, the only fasting we do is we run fast to the buffet. No, I'm kidding. I'll stop there. I'll stop there. To the potluck. Um, no, man, there's so much about fasting, especially in the Old Testament, and just a really quick study that I did. And I've studied fasting before in the past. I've heard people teach on fasting, and there are so many different like thoughts about fasting out there. It's kind of weird. Like a lot of people have different ideas about fasting. Um, Usually in a Baptist or a generally Christian, maybe even just an evangelical circle of fasting or of belief, fasting means going without food and water. And I think they usually prescribe that definition based off of um, Moses in Exodus. He was up on the Mount Sinai with God for 40 days and 40 nights, and well, no, it might not have been Moses. It's in Exodus 34. Um, it says, and he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. Neither did he eat bread nor drink water. And he wrote upon the tables of the words of the covenant. So, yeah, this is Moses up on Mount Sinai, the 10 Commandments. So he fasted. Basically, he didn't eat or drink for 40 days and 40 nights, which, like, humanly speaking, is impossible. We also see in Matthew 4 that Jesus did the same thing. He was in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. He didn't eat, he didn't drink, just like Moses. And some people will even speculate that Paul did this as well because he went into Arabia for an unknown amount of time. People will say, well, it has to be 40 days and 40 nights because that's what Moses did and that's what Jesus did. So why not Paul? Sure, okay. But Jesus did that as well. So seeing that supreme example of fasting, no food, no water, you have to do for 40 days. No, I'm kidding. You don't. Because that's humanly impossible without divine intervention these days.
It's
Um,
dangerous.
that is
Don't
dangerous.
don't
But
do 40
in
days.
in Moses's and Jesus's examples and maybe Paul's, they had direct divine uh, connection and reason for all of this, and God can sustain them through no food and no water for a reason. In some places the Bible talks about um, having no music, no lotions. Like it gets kind of specific with certain people's fastings. It's not specifically like fast with no music and no lotions, but I think it was um, King Nebuchadnezzar with Daniel. I think when Daniel was in the lion den, I think this is what it was. Don't quote me on it, but I think he was like so worried about Daniel because he felt so bad putting him, like having him put into the lion's den, that he fasted and he didn't want music and didn't want lotions. Um, a lot of times when the Bible talks about fasting, especially in the Old Testament with the nation of Israel, there's weeping. They put sackcloth on and they covered themselves with ashes, much like what Job did when all of his livelihood was destroyed. Um, but like, what is the purpose behind fasting? Why why do people fast? Why do Christians fast? Um, and the Bible talks about the effect fasting has. It talks about in Psalm 35, it talks about humbling my soul. So it humbles my soul. And I don't think it just humbles your soul. I think it humbles your body. And I think that's really the specific reason for fasting. A lot of times the Bible talks about being faint or weak in fasting. And really, like, the way I look at it, well, there's one huge element that I want to bring up with fasting in the Bible, but I brought up Jesus uh, was fasting for 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness, and the tempter came. Satan came and tempted him with many things. And it's a really interesting passage. Um, but there's one thing that he says in there that I'm going to talk about. Let's see here. I'll jump to that later because there's another good one. So in Matthew 4, it talks about Jesus fasting. Jesus, when and just in verse 1, it's like, then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. Well, yeah, because he didn't eat for 40 days and 40 nights, or sometime in there. And then when the tempter came to him, he said, "If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made of bread." It's like, hey, the devil always has these like try to. He's like a sleazy car salesman. Sometimes he's a really good car salesman. But uh, then and God or Jesus always answers back with scripture. But he answered and said, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." And then he takes him up to the pinnacle of a temple. He's like, "Hey, cast thyself down, for it's written." Like, this is Satan trying to quote scripture back to Jesus, which Satan likes to do that. He shall give an angel charge, or he shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. It's like, hey, the angels are going to protect you. Like, you're not even going to stub your toe on the stone. Like, I'm suffering with a sprained big toe right now. Um, like, Jesus wouldn't even suffer with that. Like, you have the angels at your command. And then Jesus said, "It's written, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God." And then Satan takes him up to a high mountain and showed him the kingdoms of the world, and said unto him, "All these things will I give thee if thou wilt fall down and worship me." So, like, Satan, he has dominion over these things he's showing him right now. Like, it's no secret that, like, Satan has dominion over the earth and the kingdoms of the earth, and of the world. And Satan's like, "Hey, if you just worship me, I'll give these to you. Like, you don't even have to try to take it." And then Jesus said unto him, get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. And then the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him. So, like, part of this fasting, especially in a spiritual realm sort of way, was with Jesus. It was a direct face to face with Satan, and he was giving him all these promises, trying to tempt him, and uh, seeing fasting in this light, like, not only was he starving, but he was also like directly being tempted by Satan, which, I mean, you can apply to the principle of fasting, that you're supposed to be withstanding temptation, especially when you want to make the man, that rock looks good. It looks like I could just make it into a loaf of bread. Some rocks look delicious. um, and then so I thought that was a really interesting passage on fasting, especially with Jesus fasting there. And then in Matthew 6, he gives a really interesting um, directive with fasting. He says, "Moreover, when ye fast, be not as the hypocrite of sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear unto men to fast. Verily I say unto you that they have their reward. But thou, when thou fastest, anoint thine head and wash thy face, that thou appear not unto men to fast, but unto thy Father which is in secret. And thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. So he's talking to his disciples. He's talking about he's talking to Israel. He's talking to them about fasting. And he's like, hey, when you fast, like, don't make it look like you're fasting. Don't like, oh, I'm starving. Like, just appear yourself, because fasting's not an outwardly thing that you're going to gain from. Um, but what does fasting have to do anything with a spiritual walk? Almost every time you see fasting, it's fasting and prayer. Like, you're praying when you fast. And it almost, like, why do you fast when you're praying? It almost makes you like, okay, I'm starving, but I have to like ignore the fact that I'm starving and separate myself from my body, from my flesh, and replace it with hunger for God and like hunger for spiritual things, and weaken the body. There are some uh, there's a lot to say with weakening the flesh, because we're still in the flesh. We're not bound to the flesh. When once we're saved, we're our soul and spirit are spiritually circumcised from the flesh itself, but we're still dwelling in the flesh. We're still in this body that has almost a mind of its own and almost a will of its own. And we basically have we're basically battling against the will of the flesh and our will of like from our soul versus God's will in the spirit. So it's like a three-way battle sometimes. But in this way, you're weakening your flesh, you're weakening your body, and you are communicating to God in prayer for almost a more like refined prayer, if you will. But it's to make one weak. And in 2 Corinthians 12, it talks about um, this is a famous passage where Paul talks about a messenger from Satan buffeting him 3 times. And some people say, oh, it's because he had his eye, like he didn't have good eyesight. Well, I think the um, this thing that really, I think he calls it a thorn in the flesh. This thorn in the flesh was the messenger from Satan to buffet him. I don't know if we have to like read into it any more than that, but he Paul besought. It says he besought the Lord thrice that it might depart from him. Um, so like he has this weakness, he has this like thorn in his flesh that's like, man, I just really want to get rid of this. And then God uh, responds by saying, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. And gladly, therefore, I will rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Paul was saying that. So, really, like in man's weakness, God's strength is made perfect. And even, I mean, even in his first letter to the Corinthians, he says, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. So even like in our weakness, like even in God's so-called weakness, it's still stronger than our strength. So when we get really low with our strength and our weakness, uh, God's strength shows through. So like in our spiritual walk, it helps us to be more connected to the spirit and less connected to the flesh if we're fasting. And that kind of goes back to last week, how like some people like, I only take cold showers to reject the flesh, and like, oh, I eat cornflakes with no sugar or something like that,
Without
um
any milk.
without any milk. um so it talks about uh it talks a lot about the like being weak and faint. Paul mentioned a few times like, hey, I came to you guys in weakness and trembling and fear. Like I didn't come in my own power. And that was First Corinthians 2 or maybe 1 leading into First Corinthians 2, which talks about the difference between the spirit of man, like the natural man, and the spirit of God, like a man having the spirit of God, and the contrast there. But uh, I did want to look at one verse that I had down here. Um, so, so prayer is basically always coupled with fasting. Like fasting is like almost an extreme uh, session of prayer time. And it's just, again, it's like to reject the flesh, reject earthly things, because the Paul says the things of this world, the temporal things of this world are going to vanish, but like the things that are unseen are eternal. So we want to like, it's kind of in a season of us trying to focus on that. And fasting had some really interesting application back when Christ was on the earth, and there was more an emphasis on the earth with the nation of Israel and working all these miracles to cleanse Israel. And I thought this was really interesting, and it kind of shows like a direct connection. Somehow, this fasting and prayer has some direct connection with how the spiritual realm works, and it's really weird. So, Jesus was talking to some of his disciples, um, and his disciples were trying to do the work that Jesus told them to do, and they were trying to cast out a devil, a spirit. And um, let me see. In Mark 9, it talks about it. I think it talks about it in Matthew 2. Um, and, he does his thing. Jesus saw the people came running together. He rebuked the foul spirit, saying unto him, Thou dumb and deaf spirit, I charge thee, come out of him, and enter no more into him. And the spirit cried and rent him sore, and came out of him. So, like, the spirit was, this guy was possessed with a spirit. And he was as one dead, insomuch that many said, He is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he was come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, Why could not we cast him out? And so his disciples were like, Hey, you told us to do this, but like, why couldn't we cast this spirit out? Like, this is weird. And he said unto him, this kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. And then he just kind of leaves it at that. Uh, it's like, okay, this specific kind of spirit, I don't know if it's like a specific rank or like species of a spiritual spirit, but or the way it was possessing this guy or whatever, but somehow it could only be cast out by prayer and fasting. So it's this some kind of weird spiritual realm relationship with the prayer and fasting, maybe not being so attached to the flesh and more in a spiritual mindset to cast this devil out somehow with the power that Jesus gave them and with this power that Jesus had. So it was that was probably the weirdest thing about fasting that I saw in the Bible was that, like, why couldn't we do that? It's like, oh, you can't take care of these guys except you pray and fast. Oh, okay. I'm gonna write that one down. Note to self: this one, don't eat before. um, but yeah, prayer and fasting are always coupled together, just like in that sense. And Paul doesn't say a whole lot about fasting besides what I um, might have already read. I don't know if I actually read any of Paul's specific writings on fasting, um, because for this day and age, we go to Paul's writings because he's the apostle to the Gentiles, apostle with the um, with the with the gospel of the grace of God for this day and age. He does say something very interesting about fasting. I forgot to put a note down about this, but he talks about a couple. Um, it's defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourself to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. He's talking about like a couple not coming together intimately, but so like withholding from that is also part of fasting and prayer. So you have that, you have maybe fasting from music, maybe lotions, food and water. Like there's just all these different kind of things with fasting, and you see that a lot with a lot of like more modernized quote unquote Christian teachings and practice, that they will like do a fast for like once someone's like I'm we've been fasting from complaining, we're not complaining for like a whole 2 days. So there's like different like fasts, like, oh, I'm gonna a big one that you see in a lot of Christian realms, a lot in my circles don't hold to this, but is Lent. Like, okay, I'm gonna fast from
I was just
something,
gonna say
like
that.
I'm not gonna eat chocolate for however many days Lent lasts, I have no idea. Or like the big one is I'm not gonna eat meat, except for fish on Fridays, because back then the fishermen were suffering hard from Lent. So the Pope was like, okay, you can eat fish on Fridays then, okay? Um, and so like there's a
Is that
big,
where where fish fries come from?
yeah, the fish fry Fridays, like that it's big up around where I live for some reason. Like
Oh,
fish fries
really?
are huge, like during Lent.
Wow.
It's yeah.
I was just joking, but
I mean
there's
that could be the origin of like gather round for the fish fry.
yeah.
um, I don't know if they fried fish back then, but I would if I were not eating meat. No. um, but yeah, there's a lot of different fastings. Like I've fasted for 2 days without food and water once years and years ago. Um, and that was a pretty interesting experience. And then I haven't done that since, I don't think. But a lot of times people say like if you're really praying hard about something, like fast while you're doing that, and it'll give your prayer life more emphasis on what you're praying about. So it's not a required thing. It's just when you do fast, like like Jesus said, like when you fast, it's not like fast and this is how you're going to do it. It's like when you do, like if you ever do, it's just kind of like how he said about the Lord's Prayer, which is eating and drinking. Like when, like as often as you do it this way. Like it doesn't
Whenever it
matter how often you
happens.
do it, just like this is how you do it.
Yeah.
So it is really like an optional thing if you're led to do it. If you like, okay, I just need to fast and pray for a day or something. I've been told before that biblically it's just no food, no water. Like that's all you have to do for fasting. But then again, you see all this different application to fasting from complaint. I'm going to fast from my phone for a day, like for maybe no TV week like the schools used to do. It's just different. I think really the Bible doesn't give us a whole lot of directive on how to do it or when to do it. And even like if you want to fast from other things, go for it. I think it's really left up to discernment and the um the decision of your own. So I mean, in a
Yeah.
nutshell, that's fasting from the Baptist
I was I was
point.
gonna ask if you had ever fasted for spiritual reasons
Yep, yep, yep.
just that
I
one time.
fasted and prayed. This was probably like 10 or like 8 years ago now. Um, fasted for 2 days straight, made sure I didn't look like it and I didn't complain about it. Um, no food, no water, and then at midnight, man, I think I made like a frozen pizza or something. Like, okay, I've done 48 hours. Like that's what I wanted to do. I'm eating now.
I
Yeah,
think you were saying prayer and fasting were, go hand in hand pretty much. And it makes sense. When you're praying, you're usually not eating. So if you extend that prayer for a while, you're not going to eat, you
that's
know?
true. I mean, a lot of Christians will pray before they eat, but maybe it's just a 2 day long prayer.
Yeah.
Paul does say to pray without ceasing, and it's not just a formal like you need your salutation, you need your body, your conclusion, and your sign off. like like in the prayer episode, it's supposed to be like a spiritual mindset almost of prayer. But when you're really needing to emphasize that, stop eating, put down that bag of chips, and then listen to your prayers.
I think it's interesting that you brought up that um in the Bible there were, fasting from food, but also fasting from music and lotions. And this is oddly very similar to fasting from a Buddhist perspective.
And let me say too, like when they were fasting from music and lotions, like they were fasting and withheld their music and stuff like that. Like so it was on top of fasting too. So
Yeah.
that's so yeah, I just wanted to categorize that.
Yeah. Yeah. So in Buddhism, there is an idea of fasting, and I think I touched on this a bit in the food episode where the Buddha relates his initial practice before becoming enlightened, where he was doing these very self-mortifying practices, and he kind of criticizes the very austere practices of eating like 1 grain of rice a day. um and so there's kind of a, like, that's a very extreme fasting that he tends to not support. um and I think I also touched on like the other end of the extreme, indulging, and he talks about being moderate with your food. Um I think when fasting comes up in Buddhism, there's also this kind of uh middle ground, um because the Buddhist path is the middle way between extremes, um extremes of indulgence and of, extreme austerity. And so there is a kind of formal fasting practice within Buddhism. um and I don't see it too much in like my local Buddhist community. Actually, I don't know if I've ever, well, I have seen it before, but um and it's usually done on very important big holidays. uh but it's also, um it's also encouraged to do so on uh the Aposata days, which are usually are on the full moon and the new moon. And some traditions observe it on the quarter moons as well. So when you're doing it that way, it's like basically once a week. Um, and if not, it's twice a week. And it's it's not mandatory or anything. It's kind of just he recommended, hey, this is a really good thing to do. And there's actually a sutta, the Uposatha Sutta. Um, and so I'll just read a tiny bit, one of the first paragraphs or one of the first sentences. The Buddha says, uh, bhikkhus, he's addressing some monks, Bhikkhus, observed complete in 8 factors, the Uposatha is of great fruit and benefit, extraordinarily brilliant and pervasive. And then he goes on to break these 8 factors down. And these 8 factors are actually 8 vows that you take on the Uposatha days. And they traditionally last 24 hours. So you're taking 8 24-hour vows every Uposatha. Um, and this is, it seems like it's more prevalent in Theravada. I don't quote me on that. I know my Tibetan uh, temple will sometimes offer these vows on a really big day. Like Sakadawa is one of the big like Tibetan Buddhist holidays, and so they're they're offered in some respect in probably most, I would say most Buddhist traditions. I don't quote me on that. I don't know if Mahayana Buddhism, like the various branches within that, observes them, but it's mentioned in the Pali Canon. A lot of monastics will talk about it. I mean, the monastics are pretty much doing these 8 vows all the time, plus like 200 and something more. Um, this upasita practice is a really good way for lay Buddhists to deepen their practice. It's usually seen as a really really good opportunity to just extraordinarily deepen your practice for a day. Like dedicate a whole day to the Dhamma pretty much, and even in the sutta he goes on to say, um, a noble disciple reflects thus, and they reflect thinking, as long as they live, the arahants abandon and abstain from the destruction of life. So that's number one. We're we're reflecting that the arahants live this way of refraining from destruction of life. And the first vow you take is to refrain from the destruction of life, refrain from killing. Um, it's pretty easy to do for a whole day. Um, but this is destruction of any life, so bugs even. Um, and you'll see that the first 5 uh, vows you're taking on Uposatha are actually the 5 precepts that most lay people take forever anyway. So you're not killing. Um, but it's interesting because they're reflecting that this is how arahants live. This is how enlightened beings live. This is their natural tendencies. So you're almost like practicing a whole day of how an enlightened person might naturally behave. So you refrain from the destruction of life. You refrain from killing. You refrain from stealing, from taking what is not given. Easy enough. Maybe it's hard for some people. 3 is let's see. So 3 is a little different than the third normal 5 of the 5 precepts that Buddhists take. It's refraining from any sexual activity, while traditionally that's refraining from sexual misconduct, which is different. But so during Upasata, it's refraining from any sexual activity. Number 4 is refraining from false speech, lying. A lot of these are like fairly straightforward, like, oh, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, like basic decency. The 5th is to refrain from taking intoxicants. So no alcohol, nothing that leads to heedlessness. um And the sixth one, this is where we get into upasita, like real like fasting. Um, so the sixth one is not eating at the wrong times. So what is the wrong time to eat? Um,
When you're not hungry.
I mean that's a good answer, but no. So in Buddhist tradition, the monks live this day in and day out. Every single day, they eat one meal in the morning, and they refrain from eating after noon until the next day. So it's not extreme fasting. You're still eating for the day. And, monks rely on alms rounds. So they're getting food from charitable lay people. Um,
It's like
and for lay people to
intermittent
practice
fasting.
this, what?
It's like intermittent fasting.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like this is the how the monks live. Like they will not eat afternoon, and and so lay people are encouraged to take this precept as well on the Upasita days. Um, and I will come back to this because we are talking about fasting, so I will come back to this and like explore it a little more. The seventh vow is refraining from entertainment, from music, dancing, and the sutta even says from shows. I'm sure they're not talking about Netflix, but um, and also the seventh vow is refraining from entertainment, and but also refraining from beautifying oneself, perfumes, adornments, decorations,
Lotions.
lotions. It probably excludes medicinal things, so like um just like the food probably doesn't apply to medicinal things, and I will come back to that. And then the last one is refraining from luxurious furniture, from high or luxurious couches or chairs or beds. um and I think I saw I don't know where I read it, but it was like specifics. So a bed must be lower than like 21 inches or something. Like the bottom of the bed frame needs to be lower than 21 inches off the ground or something. I don't know how like legit that is, but um it might come from the commentaries or something. But so one usually takes these eight precepts, these eight 24-hour precepts, usually from a monastic, from a monk or a nun. And a lot of times on for the Upasita, you also are like, if you're really wanting to dedicate your day to this, you'll also wear all white to symbolize, purity or whatnot. Um, and a lot of people will, if available, they'll spend all day at the temple, um, or you know, just at home, in your practice space. I saw a conversation about the Apostata on a Buddhist chat thing, and someone's like, "Oh, well, I need to like do homework and study. Is that okay?" It's like, yeah, that's probably fine. You can still get stuff done. Just avoid the stuff you vowed not to partake in. Um, but so going back to the actual food part, the fasting. It's interesting when you look at it because you're still allowed water. You're even allowed tea, or in the modern times, coffee as well, probably. You are allowed liquids to a certain extent. No milk, that's considered a food. And there's also when it comes to the monastics, at least I don't know how much this applies to the Uposita vows, but there's allowables. So there are things you're allowed after noon when you're fasting, and these are to curb like the extreme pains of hunger, or maybe your lack of energy or something. And this is they're usually like listed. I think it's like sesame oil and ghee and uh, even cheese and dark chocolate and uh,
Wow.
pulp-free fruit juices. Um, and the idea isn't to deprive yourself of this food. It's and I talked about it in the food episode. The way one approaches food is that this is sustenance to help me sustain this body, give me energy. And what you're doing for this practice is that you're kind of adopting that. It's like, okay, I eat the one meal that I need, and then the rest of the day is dedicated to my practice. I'm not going to get distracted by craving for food. So it's it's maybe a little different than most fasting practices in the approach to it, but yeah, it's the all of the precepts. You're not depriving yourself of entertainment. You're just in a way you're focusing on the practice, on the Dhamma, and you're encouraged to work on your meditation practice, to read the suttas, to do something Dhamma related.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think that's a lot of the fasting aspect within Buddhism.
Interesting. So there's no like don't eat or drink anything ever during your fast. It's just eat in the
Yeah.
morning and then you can have dark chocolate later.
I think it's like very, very dark chocolate, but
Oh, like the 99% stuff, like the
yeah, I think
tastes like a dentist glove. Okay.
yeah, I think probably it says something more along the lines of like cocoa beans or something.
Okay.
Um, but in modern days, it kind of translate as like dark chocolate.
Hershey special dark.
But I've heard monastics talk about that too, like how like you shouldn't abuse those allowables. Like I'm gonna have some cheese and chocolate later. Ooh, it's there because they're actually also like they're called allowables, but another term for them are tonics. They're supposed to be regarded as medicines. Like
Hmm.
wow, like my hunger pain is pretty distracting. Like if I just take a spoonful of sesame oil, like I'm good.
I remember when I was fasting for those 2 days, brushing my teeth was the best thing in the world. It was like water on my lips, yeah, like in my water, some water in my mouth. I didn't swallow it, or that would
That's
have been breaking my fast. But
That's interesting because a lot of religious fasting practices will also, uh, you know, say no brushing of teeth or a modified version of brushing your teeth without water.
hmm, interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, the I don't think the Bible talks about brushing your teeth like that. So
the Buddha talks about brushing teeth. Uh,
yeah, I think that was one of our funny, kind of joking, but really not um episode topics.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, I recently found a community who actually like an online community who actually you know observes the Upasita uh, vows and which I've never really you know I don't my own community doesn't do that, so I've never had the opportunity to join in with people to try that
Hmm.
until recently, and so It's like a community. It's a really small online presence, but it's led by a monastic, and you generally traditionally take the vows from a monastic. So like that's what we did on Zoom, and
Hmm.
it was a really cool experience. I have done it once before, I think last year, um, but I don't really remember that.
Yeah, it seems like at one point there might have been like a group of people that like got together and fasted and prayed for a day or something at my church. That might have not been fasting though. That might have been lunch. No, I don't remember what it was. Um, but yeah, I've heard a lot of other interesting um, things about fasting in other Christian communities. Like they'll do a big like group fast for a day or two or whatever, and then they'll like break it with a feast like any other fasting period that people do. They always end it with a great feast. So I don't think I've ever experienced that, like a communal fasting and feast. I've
Mm.
just experienced the feast part of that.
A
uh,
couple of years ago, I went to a an interfaith Ramadan iftar, the evening fast breaking, um, and
hmm,
in the spirit of doing that, I was like, I'm gonna do it, from sunrise to when we break the fast at the event. And I mean, the Ramadan fast is a fast from food and water, and I have no idea how anyone does it when Ramadan is in the summer, because like the
mm,
last couple of years it's been
yeah.
in the spring, and even that was tough. And I think I like even failed and like had to drink some water. But uh
Wow. Yeah.
like kudos to everyone who does Ramadan, because that is for a whole month you're doing it, from sun up to sundown, and then these awesome like community get together fast breaking meals. uh it's so
Hmm,
cool, especially because you're doing it before the sunrise, at like 3 or 4 in the morning. You get together, and then
hmm,
when the sun goes down, it's a great party. It's a great time with a lot of good food and people.
hmm. Wow. That's interesting. Yeah. If you guys, our listeners and viewers, have any fasting practices from your own faith or even just a funny story or something, send it to us because I mean, we just have our experiences, which doesn't sound that wide in variety of fasting, if you will, but um, yeah, we want to hear from you guys too. Um, I remember our friend, I'm not going to name him, but he said he was like did a fast for a while and then they went to eat at IHOP and like they all got sick from eating so much sugar after their fast. Which
That
that kind of scares me after a fast, like just like binging after that. It's like I think you got to take it slow or like you're going to shock your system with food after nothing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because like, what's the hardest discipline, the fasting or the healthy breaking of the fast?
Exactly. Like I said, after 2 days, I ripped into after like chugging a bunch of water or something, I ripped into a frozen pizza or something. I think it was a frozen pizza. I don't remember exactly, but it was at midnight. I'm like, I'm starving.
It's interesting with my limited experience with the the Buddhist version of fasting. Like a little after, like you're so hyper, where like, wow, I'm not gonna eat. This is wild. But then after a while, it's like you're not hungry. You don't really care. And then in the morning, it was like, I guess, like, yeah, I don't feel hungry, but I'm gonna eat something,
I think like hardest the the hardest hitting effect that I had from fasting was like not like my stomach growling or anything or like man I'm so thirsty, but like the energy level of my body was like way low and I'm almost in like a daze sometimes. Like I was working those 2 days. I think it was the 2 days I was working at the time. Luckily, it was just like an office job, so I wasn't like running around or anything. But I was talking a lot though, so that was really hard.
Man.
But like just like being like, I mean, I can feel myself not drinking water in like half a day. I'm like, man, I need to drink some water. I'm like so out of it. Like the 2 days were pretty intense to do that.
Yeah.
I think I did slow like pace myself for like drinking like introducing water back into my system after a while. I think I did pace myself on that. I don't remember. It was years ago.
Yeah. If it's like, okay, I'm getting a little hungry, it's just take a little shot of sesame oil and
That would be kind of good.
sesame
Especially if
oil
you're
is pretty.
starving.
Yeah. Uh, the next Uposatha is the biggest. So the Uposatha, you know, there's two every month if you do the new moon, full moon, and a lot of the full moons, like the full moons are when the big holidays happen.
Hmm.
So February I think is like Sangha Day. There's a Dhamma Day and the full moon in May is is Vesic, the biggest Buddha holiday.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's like in less than 2 weeks. It's Monday the 16th. Yeah, it's like a week and a half. Um, so that's
Wow. Yeah, it's May.
yeah. So that's coming up pretty soon, and
Pretty
we'll
fast.
probably what?
It's coming up pretty fast. I'm sorry I didn't have as many puns as last episode. I'm starved of puns.
We just had to work up an appetite towards it, I guess.
Right.
Uh,
Exactly.
but but yeah, I'm sure we'll probably do a special holiday episode near Basic and go into a little more detail on that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I want to hear about that, and our listeners definitely do too, because I've been hogging the holiday episodes lately.
You know, yeah.
So you'll get your shot. I'm not. I'm not trying to withhold episodes from you, and it's like almost like you're in a episode fast. Okay, it's so hard to make fasting puns.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just empty of puns. No, it doesn't work. I'm trying to break my pun fast by throwing out some puns, but I guess I just got to pace myself. It's not working.
It really isn't.
Well, I'm, I applaud your not yelling at me. Um, so I think I'm trying to think of where we could go from there with fasting, but really, like, we're just running on empty.
So does fasting play an active part in your practice
so
minus the several years ago?
So no, not really. There's not a huge emphasis in the church, and I'm saying the church in general, like in the Baptist circles at least, and the grace believers, the grace churches out there too. I don't see a huge emphasis on fasting, and it's more individualistic. Um, and I mean, personally, I don't fast a lot. Um, and I guess maybe I don't have the the dire need to or anything like that. And maybe I should. But again, it's more of a personal decision and up to your own discernment to do that. So I don't see actively a lot of people doing it, um, but that doesn't mean they're not doing it. Because you, again, like Jesus said, don't outwardly show that you're fasting. You're supposed to be like you're not fasting outwardly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't see a whole lot of it
And
personally.
it also seems like a lot of Christianity, especially like Protestant Christianity, is very much less orthopraxic than, you know, than, other traditions that might be very much more about what you do, how you do it. Um,
Yeah. Well, and that comes from the protesting of the church, um, and not that again, not that the Baptist lineage comes out of the protesting Protestants. It's semi debatable, but yeah, a lot of it is not focused on like the like doing the practice by the book or like how people lay it out to do it. And so like if we do it, we do it. But some even more like evangelical um, modern churches will like kind of emphasize a form of fasting, like oh you gotta fast from TV or the phone. So yeah, it's all it's different in so many different Christian cultures. The closer you get to Catholicism, I think the more you would see practices like that. Maybe like in like the Lutheran Church as well. Um, you might see some of that, some more of that as you look around. But um, yeah, that's a good point.
hmm. Yeah, we don't.
Well,
Uh,
go ahead.
I can't remember where I was going with that.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna try to come up with a pun for fasting in response, but I can't.
How about we fast from puns?
You hate me. uh, no, but I think that is a great place to break the not the
Fasting
fast, but
episode.
the cast. Break the cast. Breakcast. Oh, I think we're gonna stop there for now, guys. This has been actually a faster or shorter episode, if you will.
And it's
Um,
turned into a fast and furious episode.
I mean, I don't see prevalence of theory just yet. It's not there yet because I need to throw a little more puns out there real quick, but or real fast, and then I'll really see the theory.
You better run fast.
Oh man, that was a good one. Oh, well, guys, we want to hear from you. Even though next episode won't be on this topic, we still want to hear and revisit the topics from your comments and your emails and messages. So feel free to hit us up on anything, really.
Yeah, we
Email
love.
us at baptistandbuddhist@gmail.com. Have we checked the spam filter lately?
I don't know. I was just about to say we love to hear like, you know, if you want to say something about episode 1 or episode 2 season 1,
Hmm.
like it's never too late. We love talking about what we talked about in the past. So
Exactly.
give
So
us
if
a
you're
reason to revisit
So right now, if you're
topics.
listening to season one and you binge it enough and get to this point, and it's like, oh yeah, I wanted to bring up something back in season one. Do it now.
Baptistandbuddhist at gmail.com.
And Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. All those places. Hit us up there.
At us.
At us. Yes, at us. The ampersand. Um, no, that's not the ampersand. That's just the at symbol. What is that called? What is the at symbol called? Like, what's
At
the
symbol.
technical term for it?
Probably the at symbol.
No, no, because I don't know. There has to be a name for it. It's called the something. I don't know what it is. If you guys know, let us know before Brian finds it. Quick, quick, let us know.
Commonly called the at symbol. Commercial at or address sign.
Commonly, but what's the technical term? I'm kidding. I'm not gonna push it any more than that. Yep. No, still no one telling us what it is. So I'll go with that.
Oh, wait. Oh, I don't know.
Oh, I'm starving for the answer.
Oh, I found it.
Yes. Breaking our at fast. What is
It-
it? Come on. You said you
just
found it.
just wait, just a little fast from the answer a little bit more.
I know. I said it's our at fast.
It looks like people are calling it the amphora.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Sure. That did not satisfy my hunger for knowledge. But yeah, at
Maybe that's
us,
not the real word, actually.
DM us, slide into our DMs. Um, and if you know any more about the at symbol, tell us.
Apparently, this is vital information.
Well, it's a conversation piece. So with that, guys, we are gonna call it, and we will see you guys next time. This has been the Baptist
And the Buddhist.
with Mark,
And Brian.
and go break that fast. I don't know what else to say.
Bye bye.